starting 9 verses in, you can remember that what we saw at the beginning of the chapter, what John saw, was the new heaven and the new earth, along with the new Jerusalem. And of all three of these, the angel that we encounter here in verse 9 at the beginning of our morning's text is most interested in giving John and us also a tour, not necessarily of the new earth, not of the new heaven, but actually the city. As fun as it would be to get a visual tour of either the heaven or the earth that God remade, that's not what the angel is interested in. One of the seven angels, and this is one who had the seven bowls filled with the seven last plagues, comes to John and says, I'll show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. Carries John away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and shows him the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. So here this morning we get a great tour, if you will, of this city. If you don't like light, if you don't like color, if you don't like jewels and gold, and gemstones of all kinds, then just you're not going to like it. You know, and some people don't like city life anyway. They prefer the country. Well, let me reassure those of you who are country folk and like trees and rivers and organic rather than man-made. This is the perfect combination of both. Because though it's a city, it was made by God and is all natural, every bit as much as Glacier National Park would be, but with all of the splendor that a city has to offer. So this is the best of both worlds, not made with concrete and iron and glass, but this is made with materials that are formed by the hand of God, put together by God, assembled by Him, and then presented to us as a new home. And it's really this city that the angel shows most interest in. He's going to show us now, take us on a grand tour of this city. And the reason is because the New Jerusalem, above all else in God's new creation, this is above the earth itself and the heavens upon which or in which it exists. It's the city here that stands out in beauty and in significance and in glory. In moving forward, I'll tell you that we have no reason to believe that this is the only city that is going to be on the new earth. Quite possible that there will be dozens or hundreds or thousands, maybe tens of thousands or more of new cities on this new earth, and maybe even within the new universe. But this is the only one worth mentioning. It's the only city that we're told about because it's the crown jewel of God's remade universe. Ultimately, this is the center of the new universe because this is where God dwells, in the New Jerusalem. And so this is what the angel wants us to see, first and foremost. John says, this angel carried me away and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, in verse 10. As interested as John may have been in seeing what the new earth looked like, I think that it's the new Jerusalem that particularly excites him. He's thrilled to see the Jerusalem in its new condition because John was very familiar with the long and sordid history of that city. John was Jewish. This was his capital city. He had seen it and learned about it and walked through its streets and worshiped in its temple. Really all his life, he was very familiar with Jerusalem. The name itself means city of peace, if you didn't know. But it wasn't really known for peace, was it? We can read about Israel's history. We can even look all throughout modern history and see that Jerusalem isn't necessarily marked by peace, certainly not peace with God. Long and tumultuous history between God and His people, racked with idolatry. Jerusalem was steeped in all kinds of sins, so much so that even in the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah introduces his prophecies in the very first chapter of that book, verse 21, saying, Jerusalem is a whore. Well, that's strong language. And he goes on for the next 66 chapters of his book explaining, but Jerusalem had grown very corrupt. Jeremiah used similar language when he was addressing the issues of that city and that nation. Hosea did the same thing. A lot of other prophets. This is not an uncommon theme. Even in chapter 11 of the book of Revelation, the Apostle John compares Jerusalem to Sodom. And if you know anything about Sodom, you know that that city was a very corrupt city, and John is indicating here that Jerusalem was no different. So John knew that Jerusalem was corrupt. John knew that Jerusalem needed help. And John is very relieved to see Jerusalem in a new and holy condition. Not only did John know the disappointing reality of Jerusalem's spiritual condition, he was also very aware of her physical condition. You remember that John is writing the book of Revelation in about 95 or 96 A.D. If you know anything about history, you know that about 25 years prior, in 70 A.D., John would have seen Jerusalem obliterated by the Romans. The city was devastated, leveled, and that would have been heartbreaking in a way that you and I cannot imagine. This has not happened on American soil, not in our lifetime. You think 9/11? Oh, pardon me. 9/11 doesn't hold a candle to what would have happened in Jerusalem. This was John's capital city. This was the city that was so rich in history. His soul was tethered to Jerusalem because it was the hub of their religion. No doubt John was personally familiar with the city, having spent so much of his life and time there. Jerusalem was embedded forever in his heart as a beloved thing, just as it was for all Jewish people. And he had seen it leveled, absolutely leveled. One source tells us that the Romans attempted to erase the memory of the city, the land, and the events that had occurred there. That was the hope of the Romans in conquering Jerusalem. Josephus, a Jewish historian, a well-known name among scholars, he wrote that Jerusalem was, quote, so thoroughly laid even with the ground when the Romans dug it up to the foundation that there was nothing left to make those that came believe the city had ever been inhabited. So they came and they did their job. And John knew about it. John saw it. John was there. So the destruction of Jerusalem would have wounded the psyche and injured the very souls of the Hebrew people. John had managed to survive. Not everybody did. Many were killed. But he still carried the scars. And by the time he was banished to Patmos, you remember that that's where he's writing from in the book of Revelation, Jerusalem still hadn't been rebuilt. So here's John catching a vision of this new Jerusalem, while in real time, it still lays in ruins. And here's what's interesting is that it hadn't yet been rebuilt, but John knew that it would be one day. You know how he knew? Because in his visions of the future tribulation, he watched it get destroyed all over again, right? This time by God. You remember, earthquakes came in chapter 11 and devastated 1/10 of the city. And then in chapter 16, the 7 bowl judgments come and destroy the other 90%. So John has watched Jerusalem get leveled over and over, and here it comes in great glory, descending from heavens, rebuilt by God with indestructible materials and brilliant, wonderful light and color. It's the dwelling place of God. So I think, to say the least, it's going to be really hard for you and I this morning to imagine John's relief and joy in this passage. He sees the new Jerusalem, and it makes him happy. That's all I got to say. He's happy to see it. So we get to look at it too, all right? And this angel is showing us. This is conceivably the same angel as we saw in chapter 17, verse 1, who showed us the harlot city. You remember Babylon, yeah? The counterfeit bride. But here, this angel is showing us the holy city, the Lamb's bride. And so this isn't the first time that we've seen a city personified. We saw it in chapter 17. We're seeing it again here in chapter 21. And to be straight with you here, I'll tell you that we, as Christians, bear resemblance to both cities, both the harlot city of chapter 17 and to this New Jerusalem here. In our sin, we were as the harlot. But by faith, we are as Christ's wife. And there are such parallels between us and this city that the angel actually begins by calling it the bride, the Lamb's wife. And we know what that means. We've been called throughout the New Testament the bride of Christ. So we already know by the time we get to Revelation that we are, in some respects, this bride-to-be of the Lamb. And now the angel comes to John and says, I'll show you her. So there's got to be some parallels here. One of them is this. If God can take John's old, dirty, crime-ridden city, full of sin and pollution, and make it entirely new and beautiful to present it in glory to a recreated universe, then certainly he can take an immoral man or woman like you and I and make them holy. And maybe the only way that we can even come close to knowing how excited John was in seeing this new city would be to try and imagine how much joy and relief we will feel when our sin is fully and finally gone and we are at last made brand new. I hope that helps. One day we will be in glory, and if you can fathom in the least how you might feel to stand there one day in this new condition, glorious and sinless and full of light and beauty, then maybe we can understand how John felt here. So what does she look like, this bride? This city. This bride. What is it? Is it a city or is it a bride? Again, there are parallels. Her light, in verse 11, was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. That's where we start. And you notice that it's still being personified. Her light. Her light. Also in verse 12, she had a great and high wall. So now, as we move on from that verse, it's going to start referring back to the city as it, and the city as an object, as a created thing. But we start here still in the context of seeing what John sees as the bride of the Lamb. And so there's some similarities here still to be recognized as it fades into its nature of city. But here, her light, we're told, was clear as crystal. And so there's probably a lot to see and to notice about this city, but the first thing that we see of all the wonderful attributes of the new capital city is the purity of the light that she emits. That gets first mention. And so purity is a distinguishing characteristic of the city itself. Not only of the city, but the person that the city represents, and that would be the bride of Christ, right? That would be you and I. So there will come a day when we will be marked and most known for the light that we emit. You contrast that with what we emit right now, which isn't always so bright. The Bible says we shine, so to speak, as believers. Jesus says that we are the light of the world. Yeah, that's true. But we're not always as bright as we should be if we're true to what we know of ourselves. We're not as pure as we'd like. We aren't satisfied yet. But we can trust that that will no longer be the case in the eternal resting place for Christians because we're shown that here. So quite possibly the most striking difference between who we are right now and who we will be then is the same thing as what we see in the New Jerusalem, the purity of the light that we emit. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8 says, "At one time you were darkness, but now you're light in the Lord. So walk as children of light." In 1 John 2:8 it says, "The darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining." It's already started to shine. Maybe not in the brightness that we'll one day be known for, maybe not to the degree that we would like, but we are and eventually will be. So the first thing we see is this clearness and the purity of the light that comes out of the city. It says in verse 12 that she also had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west. So these are really, really high walls. He's going to measure the city, and the city will be 1,200 furlongs, 12,000, I'm sorry, furlongs wide, 12,000 furlongs long, and then also 12,000 furlongs high. It's about 1,500 miles cubed. So you think 1,500 miles up. And I only say that because when we talk about these walls being great and high, we're talking well over 1,000 feet in the air. If they go to the top of the city, these are 1,500 miles up. All right? It also says that he measured the wall, and it was 144 cubits. I think that's 216 feet. And I don't believe that's talking about the height of the wall. I think it's talking about the thickness of the wall. It's got to be a pretty thick wall if it's going to be very high at all surrounding that city. If it's 216 feet, I mean, imagine putting a 216-foot wall around a 1,500-mile high city. That just doesn't make sense. Okay, so we're going to go with thickness there. But these are walls that can only be described with the adjectives great and high in verse 12. So these are big walls. But we don't, well, I mean, what are these for? There are no attackers in the New Jerusalem. It says that they have 12 gates. These gates are huge. In walls that big, they're enormous, but they're never shut. They're never shut because they don't need to be. There's no threat out there. Well, these walls and these gates aren't meant to keep anyone out. Well, the walls and the gates are there for no other reason than to remind everyone that they've been allowed in. We ought to look at the New Jerusalem and see it as something that, had the gates not been left open, we would never have access to what's inside, namely God. But they're opened so that we can go in. And they're never shut, by the way. Never any reason to have them closed. So these gates and these walls will make it impossible for us, even over the duration of eternity, to forget that really the only reason we can approach God at all is because Jesus made a way. In John 10, Jesus said, "I'm the gate. I'm the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved, and they will come and go freely." We will come and go from the New Jerusalem without question. In verse 21, we're told that each gate was 1 pearl. Now, this is noteworthy. That's big. I don't know if you're familiar with pearls. They don't get very large. They come from oysters, which themselves don't get very big. Certainly not, like 1,500 miles across. These are enormous pearls. And pearls specifically are an interesting material to be used in the construction of the gates because pearls are emblematic of truth. And you remember that Jesus said, "I am the truth." So there's some symbolism going on here. Even in the ancient world of all precious stones, none of them were as highly valued as the pearl. Did you know that Jesus, according to the parable, is the pearl of great price in Matthew 13? So this gate, in some respects, symbolizes Jesus. A commentary is helpful on this. John Phillips makes note on how pearls are formed. If you don't know how pearls are formed, it's an interesting process. He explains it this way. The humble oyster receives a wound. Typically a grain of sand gets in. And around the offending article that has hurt it, that oyster builds a pearl. So the pearl is the answer of the oyster to that which injured it. How like God it is to make the gates of the New Jerusalem of pearl. Think of the size of those gates. What gigantic suffering is symbolized by those gates of pearl? And Christ's answer to those who injured him is to invite them in, to share his home. J. Vernon McGee adds and says, we were that little grain of sharp and dirty sand in the side of Christ. And Christ took that ugly thing and covered it with his righteousness. The beauty is not in the grain of sand, but in what the organism puts around it. You think we'll be remembering anything as we pass through those gates, or do you think it will just be a superficial, carnal, wow, that's pretty? No, I don't think so. Having the intelligence that we'll be endowed with upon our arrival, we'll say, wow, not only is that pretty, but it is deep in significance, and Jesus, you are deserving of worship, and I'm here to do it unendingly. And the angel that guards the gate, come on in. Enter into eternal rest. This is going to be fun. And I have no idea what that's going to be like. You know, angels tend to be fairly intimidating. Every time they show up on earth, the Bible records how human beings are like, ah! And the angel has to first say, calm down, okay? Fear not. Why? This is kind of scary. You know, these are the doormen of the New Jerusalem. These are the armed guards, if you will, you know. They kind of look intimidating. Their uniform is insane. They got 4 faces, you know, like a whole back full of wings. They're, you know, and we walk in and there's this angel with an eagle face and then a lamb, or, you know, like an ox, and then a lion, and greetings. Come on in. Every time you come, they're going to be there to say hi, tip their hat if they wear them, and come on in. Conjecture, but I do know the angel is standing there at the door. I don't know what they're for. They don't need to protect me because there's no threat. There's no attack, right? And are they just there to greet us? Is that their job for eternity? Angels are super patient. You know that some of them have been standing at the river Euphrates waiting for like chapter whatever that was to happen. That's just, they're stationed there. You know, angels are just, they got a job and they do it well. And so you got to wonder, what are they doing? Well, you can ask him when you get there. What are you doing? And then he'll tell you. Is that what the other 11 are doing? I'd go there, but it's like 1,500 miles to get to the next angel, so, you know. So in verse 14, it tells us about these 12 gates, 12 foundations. The wall of the city has 12 foundations. On them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So these 12 gates that we read about in verse 12 have the names of the 12 tribes written on them. The 12 foundations in verse 14 have the name of the 12 apostles on them. The 12 tribes come from the Old Testament. You know that, the children of Jacob. The 12 apostles, of course, come from the New Testament. And I think it's interesting that both the Old Testament saints as well as the New Testament saints literally have their stamp on this New Jerusalem. So even though it's new, it still retains elements of the past. It still retains elements of Jewish history, Christian history, human history. right? There's something about antiques that we like, something that gives them value in our eyes. We go to the antique store, depending on what you're looking for, you may end up paying a pretty penny in order to get something that's been used already, something that's already worn out, something that's already old. But that's why we buy them. That's why we like antiques. We like them for the fact that they aren't new. They have value for no other reason than that they have history. So Jerusalem has this. Even though it's new in its kind and in its quality, it isn't new in the sense of historic significance. The Old Testament saints, the New Testament saints have made their mark on this new building. And so the past isn't fully erased in the New Jerusalem. Right? I don't believe we will have some sort of spiritual amnesia where nothing is literally remembered. Or are we going to see these names and go, who's John? Like we're going to wonder for eternity, who's Peter and Andrew? Who's Joseph? Who's Issachar? I already wonder who Issachar is, but he's one of the 12. Yeah. And by the way, not only is history not erased, identity isn't either. If you noticed, nobody told John that this was Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. Nobody told him. The angel wasn't like, John, if you're wondering, it's Jerusalem. He just knew it. He recognized it instantly, knew full well. So none of the elements that give Jerusalem its fullness and its richness are lost in the remaking of it. It's new, but it hasn't lost what made it valuable. Another interesting note that the scriptures make for us here, in that the Old Testament tribes are written down on the gates of the New Jerusalem, and then the New Testament apostles are written on the foundation. The fact that the Old Testament tribes are linked with the gates and that the New Testament apostles are linked with the foundation, that's significant. It's not reversed, okay? The apostles aren't connected to the gates, and the tribes aren't connected to the foundations. Rather, the Old Testament is connected with the gates. The Old Testament is connected with the gates. Gates are where you enter in. The New Testament saints are connected with the foundations. Foundations are what you build upon. And this is how it works for you and I. You enter in to faith by believing what the Old Testament law says about you. But you build your life upon trusting in what Jesus has done for you. You enter into the work of the Old Testament saints. You built and live upon the work of the New Testament saints. In verse 15, John makes note of the fact that this angel had a gold reed to measure the city, the gates, the wall. And then he tells us the measurements here. And I've already told you that this is gigantic, enormous. It's colossal in its scope. To give you a sense of scale, 1,500 miles is from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, and would go from the Appalachian Mountains in the east to the border of California in the west. So this, you can see this from outer space, not to mention the fact that now we're going up too by the same distance. So 1,500 miles cubed. And I want you, just so that we're not confused, in verse 17 when it says that he measured the wall 144 cubits, when it says according to the measure of a man, that is of an angel, these aren't different measurements like men use tape measures and angels use some kind of weird thing that the inches aren't the same as human inches and the feet aren't. What this is telling us is that they are the same, because in verse 15 it said that the angel had the measuring rod, and this is John just going, by the way, the angel's measuring rod was marked out just like a human measuring rod, so it's the same thing. So when we're talking about furlongs or cubits, it is what it was to them. A cubit is 1.5 feet, roughly 18 inches. The furlong equates to about 1,500 miles, 1,500 miles, something like that. So we're talking about a huge city. 1,500 miles cubed. Just to give you a little bit of information into this, and this may bore you to tears, but that's okay. I find it interesting. 1,500 miles up is extreme in our current atmosphere. What we call outer space begins 62 miles up. So if you can understand, the top of the New Jerusalem reaches 1,438 miles into suborbital space. And we have every reason to believe that not only is it accessible to us when we're there, but also habitable. Because if you right now go 1,500 miles up, your life is in danger. You'd better be well equipped with, all kinds of weird NASA gear. You're going to need a little spaceship to get up there, big spaceship, and all kinds of, suits and oxygen tanks and all the rest. But there is no life-threatening loss of oxygen no matter how far you get from the new Earth. There's no drop in temperature, apparently. Comfortable atmosphere, climate, no UV radiation, no matter how close or far you are from any other celestial body. So this is going to be quite a difference for us. Some people wonder whether there's going to be enough space in the New Jerusalem for all of us. First of all, I don't know how many people are going to be there, but let's pretend that there's going to be billions and billions and billions. Let me tell you this. The ground floor of the New Jerusalem alone would provide over 2 million square miles of habitable land area. Habitable. You remember that this earth is very uninhabitable. About 3/4 is covered with water. Of the remaining 1/4, 1/3 of it is desert, and 1/4 of it is mountains. So we have very little habitable land anyway. But on the ground floor of the New Jerusalem alone, you've got well over 2 million square miles. Now let's say that being built up, let's just pretend that the New Jerusalem has levels to it, or floors. And let's just say, to be generous, that one floor is 10 miles above the next. If they were 10 miles above, I could be on the ground floor of on any floor of the New Jerusalem, and there is enough space between me and the next level for clouds and air traffic. Okay? So 10 miles, that's generous. Let's say that's the case. You would have over 130 million more square miles of livable space than our current Earth does of livable and unlivable space combined. And that's in one single city. So will there be room for all of us there on the new earth, in the New Jerusalem? Well, Jesus puts it this way. In my Father's house are many rooms. So maybe cities turn you off because of the population density. There will be no real population density in the New Jerusalem. It'll be very, very uncongested and very clean too, marked by its purity throughout this chapter. In verse 18 it says that the construction of its wall was of jasper. A little bit of research could very well lead you to conclude that when it says jasper, it's actually referring to diamond. The city was pure gold, like clear glass. So we're talking about a city that's built out of solid diamond and glass of such purity that it's clear. Now, if you know anything about gold, what makes it yellow is everything you don't want. It's the impurities. If it was pure, it would be see-through. We could have gold windows if we could just find gold that was pure enough. So this is a see-through city, marked by its purity. There's nothing in the city to impede the light that emanates out from the city, which leads us to understand then that the city was literally built to radiate the glory of God, because it's God that lights up the city. There's no need for a sun or a moon. It's the light of the Lamb, and this light emanates from the city and is reflected and refracted by the materials it's built out of. The whole city is iridescent. The jasper walls or diamond, whatever it is, and the gold streets have no impurities. The gemstones in the foundation refract the light and then intensify. If it's possible to intensify the glory of God, they do that very thing. They intensify and enhance the multicolored brilliance of God's shining glory. There's nothing to stop it in the New Jerusalem. Everything magnifies God's glory. There's no contaminants, not in the construction materials of the city, nor in its citizens. You and I will no longer impede God's glory, but I believe we too will reflect and refract it ourselves. The New Jerusalem is going to be marked by total transparency. Everything that we read about in this chapter are just the highlights. There's so much more to be said and to discover and get excited about concerning the New Jerusalem that John simply doesn't have time for, nor does it really matter. It's for us to discover one day on our own. I'd rather experience it firsthand than to hear about it secondhand. Okay? So what we know from what we can read about in chapter 21 is the fact that Jerusalem will be transparent. That might bother some of us because at this point we like privacy. The only reason that we like privacy now is because we have things about us that would cause embarrassment. But there will simply be nothing to be embarrassed about. There will be no shame of sin. There will be nothing to make us desire secrecy. There will be nothing about anybody who inhabits the New Jerusalem worth hiding. There will be no desire to hide. Our sin will be gone. Adam didn't want to hide from God until sin entered the picture. That's when he borrowed that tree. Before that, there was no reason to believe that there was anything but transparency before the Lord, and we will return to that one day. In verse 22, we're told that there was no temple there. This is another striking characteristic. John picks up on it like that. He says there was no temple there. He says the Lord God and the Lamb are the temple. They are the temple. So there's nothing in this city to impede the light, and there's nothing in this city to impede worship. You don't need to get somewhere in order to worship God. Worship happens everywhere. Every square inch of the New Jerusalem is a suitable space for worship, and we will make use of every square inch of the New Jerusalem to do just that, I guarantee you. The reason is because this is God's home. This is where God dwells. Worship will happen everywhere. In verse 23, John says, "The city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, because the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light, and the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light." And so here we see that there is no need of the sun, because God is illuminating the city. The nations also walk in the light that God illuminates for them, and its gates are never shut. So there's nothing in the city to impede the light. There's nothing in the city to impede worship. And there's nothing in this city to impede our way, our walking. We don't need the sun. God illuminates our path. Nations walk in its light. There's no gates to keep us out. The gates are always open. Nothing to impede our walking with Christ forever. Well, that's nice, because right now there's a whole lot of things that get in my way. Not sure about you, but I got distractions in my life, and I got temptations in my life, and I got weaknesses in my life. And to know that there will come a day when there is no longer any difficulty in finding and following God, that's rather appealing to somebody who's trying to do it now and can hardly manage. I want to find and follow Christ with ease. And here, nothing will be easier. So we'll live in an environment where there will never be any such thing as darkness. There will never be any such thing as stumbling because of darkness. There will never be any lack of clarity, no being in the dark, no not knowing what God's will is, none of that, either physically or spiritually. And in the last verse here it says that there shall by no means enter into this New Jerusalem anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So anyone on the new earth has access to the New Jerusalem anytime they wish. We know that's true because anyone whose name was not found in the Lamb's book of life, they aren't on the new earth. Where are they? They're in the lake of fire. And so we have constant access at any time we want or need to go into the New Jerusalem. There is nothing now to impede our peace. And it'll be at that point, finally and forever, that Jerusalem lives up to its name, City of Peace. Never has it, but one day it will. Not in its current condition, but one day it will be remade. City of Peace. Peace with God, peace on earth, like the angels announced on the arrival of Christ at the first advent. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men, there will be peace. This is something that speaks to us, resonates with us. This is what we want. We want peace, right? We want peace. Wouldn't it be nice if we had it? We don't. We will. We will one day. Jesus doesn't want you to miss this, guys. He doesn't want us to miss out on what he offers us by way of having a home with God. He prayed about this too. In John chapter 17, verse 24, this is what Jesus prayed to God his Father on the night before he died for me and you. He said, Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see my glory, the glory that you gave me before I came into the world because you loved me, the glory I had before I came down here. I want them to see that one day. I want them to be where I am. I want to be where you are, and I want them to come with, and God wants them to, he wants us to be there. Like, you know, if you've ever, okay, we're at Christmas time now. There's some people who get gifts for a family member or someone they love, and it's like a really extraordinary gift. There was a lot of thought put into it. Maybe they handcrafted the thing or something, and they're really excited to give the gift. They're really excited to see your face when you open that thing, whatever it is, okay? Do you think that God feels that way about showing you the New Jerusalem for real? He's like, this is what you read about that Sunday morning. Remember when you went through chapter 21 and you were like, oh, that's cool. Come here. This is cool. He wants that day. He wants to see your face. He wants to present you with the greatest gift he could possibly give, you know? And it actually has the shape of a gift, like a box, you know? And it's glowing, and Jesus is there, and the saints are there. Do you want to go? I mean, we might say yes. Well, sounds nice. Is your walking with Christ building in you an ever-deepening desire to actually go? There's a lot of people who, they want to go to heaven for no other reason than to escape hell. And honestly, listen, what's written in chapter 21, it's neat, but it's not like I'm, you know, jumping for joy in my office while I study. It's kind of odd, really. Hard to imagine. I got a few details, and they're exciting enough. Oh, any joy that we could glean from reading a passage like this is going to be minimal compared to the joy that we'd have upon arrival. So right now, our desire for heaven can't come from reading a few details. Really, the only way that our excitement for heaven can be cultivated is by following Christ through a really dark world, one that doesn't shine with the glory of God, one that isn't decorated with gemstones, but concrete and broken sidewalks and dead trees, one that looks nothing like the New Jerusalem, walking through a world that is not marked by peace, walking through a world where God is rejected and not worshiped. And does that build your longing for heaven? Have you followed him? Are you following him? Is he building that in you? That's our hope. That's how it works.